I'm a founding member of Ananda, and therefore I've had a lot of experiences. So anything that relates to Swami's life or what Ananda's about, or just any old odd thing that occurs to you, but generally on that theme. And if you don't think of something, I probably will, but you can help me. So I'll say a prayer, then Sai Ganesh will do a chant for us, we'll meditate for a few minutes, and then you will proceed to ask me interesting questions. You will ask me interesting questions. Okay, let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to all. Bless us with your living presence, that we may understand your inner guidance and be your instruments of love, of courage, of kindness, of wisdom in all that we do. Om, peace. Amen.
I dance through life with thee. I sing your song and sorrows gone. In joy I live ever free. You fill my heart with music. I dance through life with thee. I sing your song and sorrows gone. In joy I live ever free. You fill my heart with music. I dance through life with thee. I sing your song and sorrows gone. In joy I live ever free. You fill my heart with music. I dance through life with thee. I sing your song and sorrows gone. In joy I live ever free. You fill my heart with music. I dance through life with thee. I sing your song and sorrows gone. In joy I live ever free. You fill my heart with music. I dance through life with thee. I sing your song and sorrows gone. In joy I live ever free. You fill my heart with music. I dance through life with thee. I sing your song and sorrows gone. In joy I live ever free. You fill my heart with music. I dance through life with thee. I sing your song and sorrows gone. In joy I live ever free. I sing your song and sorrows gone. In joy I live ever free. I sing your song and sorrows gone. In joy I live ever free.
Let's now just meditate for a few minutes. And even though I was joking about it, let's together ask Divine Mother to inspire us to be able to receive her guidance and her love and her wisdom, that we may learn something change in the ways she wants us to change, and draw closer to our final fulfillment in God. Peace. Amen. Okay, who had a bright idea? Does anyone have a question or a subject? Oh, yes, we have a microphone. If you don't, I have a clue, but I would rather start with yours. Some of you have not been in this class before. I'm just I met Swami Kriyananda in 1969. June 1st, 1971, I moved to what was the beginning of Ananda village at that point. I actually felt like a late arrival. Jyotish Devi, Binay, lots of people, Jaya, Sadhana Devi, lots of people who were critical were all there. But 25 years later, when we gave ourselves sequential numbers, I was given the number 12, but there were 2 mistakes, so I was actually 14. Of the people who came and didn't leave, I was the 14th person. And I lived in Ananda village for 16 years, and then Swami Kriyananda sent me here in 1987, Master's birthday. Most of my tribe of Ananda founding members lived in many different places. People are writing their books up. Oh, I lived in Texas, then I went to Los Angeles, then I was in Italy for a while, then I was in Seattle. Not me. I was at Ananda village, and I was here in 50 years. More recently, Swamiji has asked me to just travel around the globe. So I've sort of made up for it. But this is, I've only had 2 addresses this whole time. Very shortly after I came, Swami invited me to work for him as his secretary. So I did that for 3 or 4 years. I'm not really quite sure how long. And really sort of Swami got credit later for having this incredibly neat, orderly house. Let's just say he has a good staff. But he was totally, I remember he lived in the dome which is at the seclusion retreat, and I was just trying to organize and make sense. And he had letters, there was no email. We're talking 71, 72. Just letters. And he would have letters all over the house. And I was sort of trying to get everything into some kind of neat patterns. But he knew where everything was. Oh, Asha, the letter under the toaster in the kitchen from the man whose wife who has cancer, we should be sure and answer that one today. And the one on the dining room table under the milk carton, that's where. But he had it all in his consciousness, but we made it more systematic. The job was taken from me by Keshava Taylor, actually. I was remembering that. Keshava worked as his secretary. And Swami, at that point, he sent me out to work at, not away really, but I worked at the not the seclusion retreat. Yeah, it would have been. That was the only retreat we had. So the second job, the first job I had was cooking in the retreat kitchen. The second job was being his secretary. Oh yes, and somewhere in there, I had the job of running the publications business. But I ran it so badly that we all try to forget that I ever had that responsibility. I cooked pretty well, and I was a very good secretary. But, and then I supposedly ran, what I say jokingly is I ran it into the ground, and then they gave it to someone else. And then I took responsibility for teaching. And it's basically all that I've ever done since. I was in the unique position when I came here in 1987 that I was actually trained for the job, which was completely unheard of in Ananda history, that you would be given a job that you actually might know how to do. Because by that point I'd been traveling and giving a lot of classes, so this all made sense. During all the time, all the 40 plus years before Swami died in 2013, did he die in 2012 or 2013? Right, in the first months of 2013. So that written in there was 2012. It was a year before he died. I was always in very close contact with him. After 16 years, I moved to here. During those 16 years, almost all the time, I lived next door to him, essentially. So it was just, we were always involved. But once we moved here, he often came and visited. He stayed in our house. When all the years that we were in litigation, which was 12, our attorneys, and for a while the courtroom was here, so that brought him here. So he stood right here and spoke many times. But I was always in touch with him, either by telephone or by email. And when my father died, second parent to die, and left me a little money, I mentally put this big portion over here, which was so that wherever Swami was in the world, I could go see him. And I would never be inhibited. He kept living for a long time, it was going down and he was still there. Not that I wanted him to pass, but as a consequence of that, I also, wherever he was, I would go to India or to Italy. I never, as I said, I never lived in any of those places never lived in any of them, but I had this way, what I called, I would helicopter in for interesting moments. So I was witness to a lot of different things. But I never participated in the development of any community but this one in the village. But all of that, and because way back at the beginning, I think it was the first year, maybe the second, Swami said to me, I want you to write a book about me. And he said, he saw me turn every shade of white that there was to turn and have my heart practically stop beating, but not yet, he said. But I always had the feeling from the first I met him that I was given a front row seat for something that was going to be very interesting, even important to many, many people, and that my job was always to pass it on. And from the time he told me, he said, not yet, but he said, if it's explicit between us, I can help you. I'm wondering if it was a little later. I've always said it was right at the beginning, but it might have been just a little later because he might have already started writing the path by then, because there was conversation about Master telling him that he was going to write, and then him telling me, and that he said, and I'll help you. But he helped me all the way through because he often included me in places that I had no business being there. But from the time he told me that I was going to write about him, I was never without a notebook and a pen or a pencil. I always had it with me so that I could just make notes about anything that was interesting, which resulted in multiple file cabinets full of paper notes. When I first started writing about him, which was in 2003, it took me that long, it took me 1.5 years to organize all those notes, because even though I was conscientious about taking them, I was chaotic about saving them. I literally just dropped them into a drawer. So I spent 1.5 years and cross-referenced and filed it, which then led eventually to writing Light Bearer. First it was the little book, smaller book of stories, then Light Bearer, which is the big one, which you cannot read if you're in bed, because if it falls on you, it will break your nose. But I had to just write everything that had to be written from that. And he really helped me write that one. He was gone by then. I published it in 2019. Is that when was our 50th? Yes, 2019. So I feel like that's what I was going to say. Going back into all those notes, I find notes from 71, 72, 73, right at the very beginning, in which I was explaining Swami to people. And it was just sort of like I was a translator. I just had a feeling about what he was trying to accomplish, and I would talk to the community. The community was 50 people at that point, but I find these notes of me that I know I made up for satsangs and things like that to talk to people. At one point, I had to fill in for Swami Kriyananda when he was supposed to speak to Swami Rama back in the Midwest somewhere. Swami Rama was giving a big program. Swami Kriyananda was ill. He couldn't go. Jyotish, for some reason, couldn't go. And apparently I was the only one who could. It was a horrible experience for the people because they were expecting Kriyananda and they got me. But what was so interesting to me was I listened to Swami Rama speak, like on Friday night, whatever, and on Saturday morning I started explaining him to people. And I realized it was just a habit with me to start with the seed thought and then expand it in lots of directions. And Swami trained me, is the only way I can think to say it. He was very attentive to make sure I got it right. And the first book that I wrote, Swami Kriyananda as We've Known Him, it was supposed to be a big biography, but I just couldn't do it. I was 1,000,000 miles away from being able to. So it ended up just being stories. And I had a long history, insofar as I failed at running the publications business, I was I was paralyzed as a writer, is the only words I can use. I was phobic. I mean, I think, look at it now, I was just crazy that way. So for 10 or more years, 12, 15 years, I still had to write, and every so often I'd do something decent. But much of the time, I would bring Swami some proposed pamphlet or something like that, and he would read it. Sometimes he said he didn't even need to read it, he could just hold it in his hand and tell that it was inadequate because he could feel it didn't have any magnetism. So he threw my writing away pretty consistently for about a decade. Every so often I would get something good through. But it was difficult. I mean, now I don't know. I did sort of stop writing at one point because it was just too hard. But it was a destiny. And now I'm over it and I don't understand. Once a delusion is behind you, because I always wrote well, even when I look at things that I wrote at the beginning, but I was just crazy in my head. But when I wrote Swami Kriyananda as we have known him, it was the first time anybody had really written about Swami. No, that's not true. Davy wrote the biography, Faith is My Armor. But the kind of storytelling that I was doing in that book. And then just drawing all these conclusions, explaining Swami to everyone and what it meant and what they were doing. And for some reason, I felt extremely confident. I just did all this, and because I knew he would read it, and I just presumed he would throw it away. And so toward the end, after I was close to being done, but I think he could feel I didn't quite know how to finish it, he invited me to come visit him in India. And he had his own house at that point in Delhi, and he'd put up a tent room, made a cloth room on the ceiling because there wasn't enough guest space. It was really Jyotish and Devi's room, but they weren't there, so he allowed me to be in it. And we sat next to each other, and he just read the manuscript page by page. And I kept expecting him, to give me the bad news, but he just kept turning the pages. And then, there were funny stories, and we talked a little bit about everything. He knew nothing about it till he was reading it. It was really quite astonishing. But that was the turning point for me. From then on, he took the karma away somehow. But he made 2 corrections in that book. Some of you have heard me say this, so forgive me for those of you who have. He made 2 corrections in that book. One of them was, and they were both really important. One of them was, there's a story in there where he said he felt he was too youthful and people didn't respect him. And I wrote in the draft that he prayed to Master that his hair turn white. And it did. And Swami said to me, I did not. I said, yes, you did, sir. And I told him where we were standing because I remembered it. I have a visual memory. I told him exactly. He said, I did not. I would not have said that. And I didn't know what to do because I had been relying on my memory, and page after page was fine. So we kind of just left that one. We just had a bit of a standoff on it. And then we came to the one where the people in Italy had been arrested because there was this crazy lawsuit. We had crazy lawsuit here too, but in there, the crazy lawsuit was a criminal action. Here it was a civil action, so it was only a question of money. There it was a question of actual whether you go to prison or not. Ananda was sued and to a certain extent pursued on the same laws that were written to bust the mafia, enslaving people of weak will, things like that. It was totally bogus. The man who sued us was crazy. He sued lots of people, including his own family. It took us 7 years to straighten it out. But so our people were arrested on that one. So about 8 or 9 people went to jail, fortunately for only a week, but we didn't have any idea. Swami was in India. His health was very poor. He wanted to go back to Italy right away. It was medically highly inadvisable. And finally people persuaded him because in fact, the arrests took place on a certain time because the police in Italy is not America, although America is becoming a little less secure than it used to be, but back in that time it wasn't. They'd been watching Swami's house, and Jyotish and Devi came and stayed in his house, and Jyotish looks a lot like Swami. And they didn't know. He's the same height, same build, same color hair, So they moved in to arrest, and they came first to his house thinking they were going to arrest Kriyananda, but it was Jyotish. But they were already in motion, so they arrested the other 8 or 9 people. But Swamiji, nobody would let him go back to Italy, and then he finally figured out that if he went back to Italy, they would immediately put him in prison. And he realized that everybody would be so upset about him being in prison that it would be very difficult to deal with anything else. So he was persuaded to stay. But he said, he prayed to Divine Mother, let me help. What can I do to help? And then that day he fell flat on his back on the showers, open showers, had like a lip, like a piece of tile, like about this wide and about this high. He fell flat on his back, full weight, just to complete like that, and broke his rib or 2 very, very badly. Put him in terrible pain. It lasted for months. And basically, he said to me on the phone, I'm taking the karma for what's going on in Italy. And so I wrote that. He said, you can't say that. I said, Swami, the story has no point unless I say that. He said, you can't say that. I said, sir, it's what you said to me. You said it to me on the phone. He said, you can't say that. And then once again, we were just in an impasse. So I go to sleep upstairs in the place, and I woke up at 4 in the morning, and I often wake up with inspiration. So I woke up at 4 in the morning with the understanding, 2 understandings. One, I didn't tell you the second story. Well, I thought, okay, I can do it. I know how I can write it. It'll still make sense. And he comes in about 4:30 in the morning. He just comes into the tent. I hear him coming up on the roof. And I'm sitting there already working. And he comes in, he says, you can't, it's all right, Swami, I already rewrote it. It's different, it's fine. He said, it's not that it's not true. It's just not something a person should say about themselves. That's what he said to me. Which was also, just sort of gave me a feeling. But the other one was more interesting, was about the white hair. And I woke up in the morning, also understood the white hair. Oh, Swami would never have told Master what to do. He would have presented the problem to Master. That's why Swami was absolutely certain he never said that. What he said was, Master, I need to look older so people will respect me more. He never said, this is how to solve the problem. And it was a very odd mistake for me to make, because I was very conscious of nuance. But I think I made that mistake so that I would never make it again. That I had to look at every word that I said, even if I'd written it down at the time, and made sure that he would have said it. And even more, that he would want it said, that it wouldn't violate something that was important. So all of that is my own unique experience, which is a little tricky because it's not replicatable by anybody. But all of that also came a lot because we were sitting in the same room. But he's been gone for more than 10 years, and it's just the same. It's a question. Receptivity is a question. No, guidance is a question of receptivity, and the receptivity is a deep desire to get it right. And even if the cost is high, and also a deep desire to understand what it means to get it right. Which is, I'm giving you 2 very nuanced points. Swamiji was an incredible teacher, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of lectures and all those books. And every single word that he wrote, and truthfully, every word that he said, it was exact. And it serves us to really just contemplate it, not so that we don't just kind of get close, but we really understand how he would have done it. and so that we can consistently know what to do. That's been my experience, is that by no means am I always right. Let me phrase it this way. My emotions can get in the way. So even if my intention is right, I don't always carry it out correctly. But in almost every situation, we can figure out what the principles are and how he would have carried it forward. Executing it is another issue because of the karma that's left within us. But all of that, and I've now been, you see, I told you I would think of something. Wait, let me just think what I was going to say. When one looks back, when I look back at 1969 and 1971, and living in this little trailer, and not having a car, not having any money, I was always working for Swami, so I never even paid many bills. I didn't follow the same financial system. At a period of time, Swami would open his wallet at the end of the month and he would take out $50 and he would hand it to me. And $50 was a lot more money, but I had my little trailer, I had no car, I had no insurance, I had no dependents. I just had to buy food and propane, basically. And every time I was out of money, Ananda, Gary's brother, Aryavan's uncle, Ananda had an instinct for when I was running out of money. And he would just come over and slip some money into my hand. And I was never destitute. My parents would have helped me at any point if I'd needed it. But it was so primitive, and we were so isolated. And you look at this, and you think it's different, but it isn't. But the main part of it not being different is this. We have been charged to establish something that's going to be influential for generations to the whole planet. And even if we have electricity now and indoor plumbing, when Karen and David Gamow, Anaya and David moved here from Ananda village, I think they arrived in the late 70s. They were there for a long time. And then they came to live here at some point. And, the apartments in the community are not luxurious. But whoever, I think it might have been Gary McSweeney who showed them around, whoever showed them around, maybe it was Chidambar. But, he was showing them what seemed kind of humble. And they said, running water, electricity, this bathroom is just for us, And it was and the heat is just like, I just turned this little knob. I don't have to go out and get wood and build a fire. And they actually lived in a teepee for a long time. It just was like incredible luxury like that. But those are, relatively speaking, superficial. We're still an absolute minority on the planet, to put it mildly. We're so small nobody sees us. We have this big building right on the street. But in terms of whether the world knows that anything is happening, or even less likely gives real credence or importance to what we're doing, we have a bit of influence in a tiny sphere. But Master was an avatar, on the magnitude of Krishna or Jesus, and Master said that he'd come to set the pattern for Dwapara Yuga, that even cooperative spiritual communities, intentional spiritual communities, will be the social pattern of the future. We're struggling to just keep one or two of them going. Our existence here even is slightly threatened. I don't believe it will really result in annihilation, but it could. And it's like, and that's why it's vitally important that we pay attention to what we do and how we do it. What we do really matters, but how we do it matters even more, because we're setting a vibrational template. And everything needs to be done, and not nervously by any means. I'm not really trying to make you nervous with this, just consciously. It just isn't a question of what I prefer. It's a question of how Master would do this. There was a point in time when Ananda, as a collective became extremely enamored with a more Indian style of kirtan. Lots of names of the gods and lots of Sanskrit, and personally I loved it. I have a lot of Indian samskars and I loved it. Swami pointed out to us that Master never chanted that way. He was Indian. He knew he could have done it. And Swami pointed out to us that one of the only stories we have of Master being in India was when he chanted for hours or all night, but he chanted Door of My Heart, the chant that he wrote. Was it in Bengali? I don't know. But that's what he did. He didn't go back into the Hindu way of doing it because it's not Hinduism. It's a new expression of Sanatana Dharma. So all of those, it's just a way of remembering and being interested, not merely on how we've always done it and seems convenient, but what seems like a consistent new way to do this. How can we be faithful? And if we're faithful, everything will work out. Not everything succeeds in the short run, but everything will work out. Ananda's had a lot of failures, modest number of failures. But we had a wonderful community up in, I can't remember the town, Sebastopol. But it lasted 7 years, and land was supposed to be gifted to us. Family invited us to come, wanting us to do it. After 7 years, it became clear that the man just could not let it go. And we had a wonderful work going, but we just had to close up and come back. Laurelwood worked really hard to succeed, but never quite succeeded. So it's not like everything it's not like just because we're doing it for God, it will always come out our way. But as long as we do it with the right consciousness, it will always come out our way. Okay, questions, thoughts, other subjects? Yes, Amra.
You started out in the place where I was thinking about the last part of Swamiji's life. What did he say, or what do you remember him saying that about, our direction? I know that's probably not this week. I don't know if you're going in chronological order, but I know he gave you personal direction.
Right.
And what do you remember him saying about Ananda and direction?
He spoke about the direction of Ananda from day one all the way through. When we were still just at the seclusion retreat, he said, we'll develop first on the West Coast, and then we'll have communities on the East Coast, and from the East Coast we'll go to Europe, from Europe we'll go to Australia, and from Australia we'll go to India. And not only was that a sequence, but I always felt like Swami, that India was the purpose of all of that. That India will be more receptive if it's an international work instead of just a group of Americans trying to impose something on him. Australia didn't happen. The East Coast really never happened either, although we tried. We tried in Australia too, but neither of those worked. But he said, I no longer talk about the future of Ananda because I find instead of inspiring you all, it scares you. Just the thought, we were living we'd all just dropped out of God knows everything at that point. We were really a group of rebels, Binay came because he had burned his draft card and expected to go to prison, and he thought it would help him if he knew how to meditate. And then he ended up, he didn't come for any other reason except to prepare to go to prison as a political protester. So he was not atypical. That was basically all of us. And even the mere thought at that time that we would ever leave that isolated place and that primitive life was not an attractive thought. But he was always telling us that what Master intended and the potential of this, especially when he started writing the path, which was 74 to 76. And then, now the path we take for granted, Swami telling us all the stories about Master and all the hundreds of hours of talking about Master, but we knew nothing about Master except Autobiography of a Yogi. There was just no other source of information. And so Swamiji was constantly his job was to explain to us what we had gotten ourselves involved in, not speaking for himself at all. He very profoundly underplayed his own role and his own position, but he was the channel because none of us had ever met Master except him. But Swami always talked about it from two sides. One was that the community, Master said that the community's intentional spiritual community would be the lifestyle of the future, that self-realization would be the religion, so to speak, of Dwapara Yuga, that all religions would unite, not under Ananda or SRF, but under the principle of self-realization, that we are shifting from Kali into Dwapara, and that the form, everything's going to change. Master said, in the future, I think he used the phrase, churches will be filled with real souls, where communion and meditation will be the definition of spirituality. Autobiography of a Yogi on page 292 says that Jesus and Babaji have planned the spiritual salvation of this age. I mean, that's quite a statement that, that there's... So he said this to us all the time, and most of us took in, here's a little lozenge, we took in about that much, because just didn't know where to put it. It had no idea where to put it. But Swami was so patient. He would just slowly give us opportunities. He put a great deal of energy into those who he could see had the capacity to carry it forward. So those people who ended up founding the communities all were trained fairly much directly by him. But he never gave us more than we were able to actually comprehend. So another way of answering that is, he kept working with us, as he is still doing, to deepen our experience and to expand our understanding so that we ourselves will be able to understand what to do next. Because it wouldn't do any good. In fact, he said this himself when Master put him in charge of the monks. He said you would have thought that he would have sat down and said something about what he wanted for the monks. He said Master gave him almost no instruction, and occasionally would say some small thing or another, which you would think wouldn't be the way he would do it. But Swami said, if Master had said even one thing to me, just one thing that he wanted, he said, I would have moved heaven and earth to make that happen. But I would have done it because Master told me to do it. He said what Master did instead was he inspired Swami from inside himself. Well, this is what Swami said later. Swami said the way he related to all of us is he would project ideas and thoughts to us, and if we were receptive to his consciousness, we would receive at least some of those ideas, and the ones that resonated with our own vibration, we would accept those deeply, and then we would begin to act on them. Now, that sounds more mysterious than it is. Think about it. How many ideas pass through your head? All of us. And then every so often, one of them seems like a really good idea. And we just start doing it. And if you think, Master said ideas are not individually rooted, but they're received from the atmosphere. This is what I was saying earlier. If we really want to be disciples, and Swami, over the years, especially as it went forward, and he made so many attempts to reconcile with SRF and so many attempts to reconcile with other disciples of Master to make Ananda more than just his project in terms of direct disciples. Not one ever. I mean, many years later, 1993, some direct disciples came for the 100th year anniversary, but he was never able to make an alliance with even one. And he finally just said, Master wants it to come through one disciple. This is Sri Kriyananda's expression of his Master's work. And there should be many expressions of a Master's work because no one disciple can do it. But if we want to be in tune with that particular expression, you don't have to want it, but Ananda as a whole, that's the definition of it. We are disciples of Master through Swami. That was how he sort of suggested we say it. And so he was always working to just get us more imaginative and more creative and more deeply in tune with what we personally had to give. And by that I don't mean in any way what I have to give, almost just the opposite. Just to be in tune with whatever was being asked of us. I remember very seriously at a satsang, someone said, well, how can you tell if something that comes up is my karma to do? Somebody said, well, if it needs to be done and you're next in line. I mean, that's about how much energy he gave to my destiny. It was just, we're here together. We have one career, and that career is to build Ananda. And each of us just picks up the piece of it that works for them and gives what they can to it. So his directions were much more in terms of consciousness, is what I'm trying to say. But how that consciousness would express would be somewhat obvious because of the way he set things up. Does that in any way answer what you're asking? And he just kept telling us repeatedly, you have no idea what this is really going to become. You just can't imagine what this will become. But he didn't want us to think about it, because such a thing gives you institutional pride and it confuses you. So he would do it both ways. He wanted us to feel a profound sense of responsibility for something important, and he wanted us to be like little children and forget about it altogether. So both were true. Okay? Yeah. Yes.
Madam, with your interaction with Swami, did Swami at any point of time speak on the reincarnation?
For some reason, I have a little bit of a hearing loss now. Can you move the microphone just an inch away? Speak again. Okay, say again what you're going to say.
Yeah. I have a small question, madam. The question is like this. Did Swami at any point of time, while speaking to you, did he say that the reincarnation process, during the incarnation process, a human can incarnate as animal at a later date?
No.
Because my question is based on Hindu way of philosophy, wherein people say that if we resort to some actions which are negative, we tend to be reborn as animals. Some of the instances were being quoted by different Swamis.
I can tell you what Swamiji said on that specific point, if you like.
Yeah,
he mentioned it on occasion. He said, generally speaking, once you get to the human level, you remain on the human level. But if you behave in a very bestial way, you can be thrown back to the animal level. And usually, he said, not for very long, because your consciousness is too advanced to be in an animal body. See, think of the reincarnation like this. The reason we move forward through the animal levels and even move forward through these levels is because we manifest the body that is sufficiently sophisticated for us to be able to express the fullness of whatever consciousness we have developed. So if you're a clam and you're stuck on a coral rock, and you just open and close your mouth and the stuff comes through, you don't have a lot of varied experiences. If you're a dog, and especially if you're a dog in someone's house, you can see that you have a lot more experiences and a lot more opportunities to expand your awareness. So it's an automatic progression that we learn everything we can as a clam, and then we get to be a moving fish, and then after that we get to be a frog or whatever, and we experience the fullness of frogness, and then we get a more sophisticated body, and we just keep moving up, because there's not enough free will for the frog to do bad things as a frog. He can only just do what he does. When you get up to the horses and the dogs, which are the higher, the personalities are more distinct, and you can be naughtier and better, and you get better and worse. But if you're very bestial as a human being, you can get punished and be sent all the way back to become a beast. You know, if you're a tiger, if you've been a carnivore as a human, you might become a carnivore like that. But most of the time you come back to a human level. Although, somewhere Master said something like, you could be thrown back as far as the level of a germ and have to come all the way up from being a germ. Swami himself just repeated that without being able to really give us much context as to what you would have to do to become a germ. There are certain people I know about in history that you hope they went back to a germ so that they wouldn't cause any grief for a long, long time. But, you know, one can't really say. But otherwise, reincarnation is very sensible. Sometimes people get very confused and thinks it's very random. This is how Master explained it. Now you have, if you want to just talk odd things for a while, in Ramana Maharshi's life, Ramana Maharshi was a contemporary of Master, a great teacher in India. There was a cow, and after that cow died, the guru, Ramana Maharshi, said the cow was liberated. And they have a little moksha mandir dedicated to Lakshmi, the cow, which in and of itself is fascinating. There's also a crow. They also have some kind of a temple to the crow. Lahiri Mahashaya, quote, was working on a method to liberate animals directly without them having to go through the human level. I found in my notes, actually, I'm writing another book because I have so many more notes that I haven't used yet. Swami said, in higher ages, animals, and in the highest age, an animal could be liberated. So what Lahiri was working with is not anything we can, from this level, can see. But I want to go back to Lakshmi the cow in Ramana Maharshi's ashram, because the actual story behind that is much more interesting. Apparently, when Ramana Maharshi arrived at Arunchala, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, the mountain where he had his ashram, he lived in a cave up there for a long time. There was a peasant woman who took care of him and was completely devoted to him. But she had also to take care of her husband and her children, and so her life was very divided. So in the ashram, they believe that woman reincarnated as a cow. And the cow just sort of appeared in the ashram in rather mysterious ways. The cow kept running away from home and coming to be at the ashram. And that cow had privileges that no other disciple had. That cow, as soon as the temple would open, that cow would come in, and wherever Ramana Maharshi was, the cow would sit down next to him. He would put his hand on the cow. He would stroke the cow's head like this. He would visit the cow on a regular basis. And the way the disciples explained it was she was very much freer. She didn't have a husband to take care of. She didn't have to take care of children. Even when she had a calf, she could just give it away, you know. And so she was extremely happy just being close to the Guru. There's a story about Ananda Ma, where there was a fly that kept being on her like this. And one of the disciples was going to, perhaps take its life. And Ananda Ma said, it's a saint who took incarnation to be close to this body, meaning herself, in the form of a fly. So there's so many weird things you just don't know what to think about it. However, in the normal course of things, once you leave the animal level, you don't go back. But you can see people who teeter on the edge a little bit. Swami said there was a man in India, he met in India, who introduced his wife and just said in front of his wife that she was a cow in her last lifetime. And as Swami said, and she didn't object, she just placidly sort of accepted. I mean, who knows? You know, it's fun. You ask a question like that. There's so many interesting things that Swami either did comment or repeated Master's comment. Or if he didn't actually speak about that, you can take what he did say and you can kind of deduce from it what would probably be true. So, all right. Any other comments or questions or thoughts? This gentleman here.
One question I had was, as Swamiji was thinking about expanding Ananda, and as you're now thinking about expanding Ananda, was there any thought given to diluting, or what happens to the core message, whether it gets diluted once you are too big?
Yeah. Yeah, we think about it all the time. Because we had the weird karma to that Master's own organization, SRF, has a very profound proprietary relationship to the Guru's teachings, and a very, the only word I can think of is Catholic Church relationship to the teachings, which is to say they're very Western in the way they say this is what it means. This was especially true with the former president, with the women when they were all in charge. This is exactly what it means, and this is the only thing it can mean. So and then because there was litigation that went on for 12 years in an attempt to eliminate our version and have the sole authorized version. The end of all of this is, yes, we thought about it all the time. But we thought about it in contrast to what we were watching. And what we were watching was a deeply sincere, because all the people who ran it and run it still are very sincere, a deeply sincere desire to avoid it to keep it from getting diluted by making sure that we understood exactly what it means. But that very action is what dilutes it, because it can't be reduced to a dogma. It has to be a matter of attunement and genuine inspiration. And as soon as everything is clearly defined, and you know exactly what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do, you attract people who like to know what they're supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do. And then you also you begin to create a whole system in which there's narrow channels that you go down, and that the very act of that begins to take away a great deal of the spontaneity and the genuine inspiration. So we were always working in relationship to that image and making the best attempt possible. The fundamental difference between the Catholic Church and the way SRF declared itself to be the sole authorized channel for Master's teaching, and clarity about what Master's teaching is and isn't, what should and shouldn't be done, flows authoritatively through institutional lines. The board of directors knows the most. The president knows more than anyone else, just by virtue of that position. Ananda's position, there's a huge theological difference. Ananda's position is anyone is equally capable of receiving the inspiration of the Master. Anyone. That doesn't mean anyone will actually do it. But if you want to know what the theology is, each of us has a direct relationship with God and Guru. Now, common sense says that certain people have a better chance than other people do because they've trained themselves and they have a history of that. So it's not like it's a free-for-all. Some people take that teaching and it just becomes, there's no common sense to what happens. Everybody can equally be a channel. But in principle, everyone can equally be a channel. An institutional position is no guarantee of attunement. Or it may be, but it's no guarantee. So Swamiji's entire and constant way was to cultivate our own capacity to be in tune. And those of us who really began to understand that also realized that respect for those of proven wisdom is one of the most important principles about being in tune. You know, you can't just declare, you can't just constantly say, I feel, because I feel a whole bunch of stuff and not all of it is uplifted. Of course, I do feel, and intuition comes that way, but this is why my particular focus is really trying to educate people in the teachings in the most subtle possible way, so that we can both be individually inspired and be able to follow our own sense of intuition, but have guardrails around that, our own guardrails, that keep us from just becoming lost in our own vrittis. Because I've been on the path long enough and I've changed enough to be able to see how often I was wrong when I didn't know it, because I just didn't know it. And I was allowed to, flow until I did know it. But it also, you get a really healthy regard for one's capacity to be wrong, or the secondary way that you're wrong, which I've also managed to do a number of times, is that I start out correctly, but I get swallowed up in preferences and fears and anxieties and impatience. So whatever true inspiration there gets muddled like this. But the principle is still always there. And then Swami said, everything in the world flowers and dies. And he established Ananda as well as he could to ensure its vitality for as long as possible. It's very decentralized. Every one of the communities is equal. Each community has a lot of opportunity to self-define. The guardrails are very wide. They exist, but they're very wide to self-define. Swami went so far as to say, I'd rather a new group of people makes the same mistakes every 5 years than that we make rules to prevent them from making those mistakes. Because you see, that's what institutions do. Somebody makes a terrible mistake, we can't ever let that happen again. So then the next person is held back. But he always wanted to give everybody enough space to mess it up on their own, because then you would really know. And that's a little harder to do when nobody had anything. When $3,000 was a lot of money, you could give people a lot of latitude. When we're dealing in the hundreds of thousands or the millions, you have to be a little more careful. But if we're too careful, we'll ruin everything. So, and then he warned us very strongly. He said, prosperity will be Ananda's biggest challenge. Because when we had nothing at all, you were just there to give because there wasn't much you could get. But as soon as you get even a little more comfortable, then all of a sudden you start thinking about, well, I could have 2 bathrooms in my apartment. I could have more than this. I could put a new rug in over here. If I just got a little more money, I could take more holidays. And you're just not thinking, he didn't say it would happen, but it could happen. And the level of total disregard of self-interest, he said, it's harder to maintain it when there's more prosperity. It's easier to maintain in great austerity. At the same time, though, you can't prevent prosperity from coming, because in the U.S. especially, at a certain point, they used to have these programs up in San Francisco, Meeting of the Ways. This was in the 70s when there were a lot of Indian gurus and a lot of really prominent teachers in the U.S., and they were all here in San Francisco, the Meeting of the Ways. And I was often in the back seat of the car. The car would go somewhere with Swami in the front seat, and I would be in the back seat. Keshava Taylor, Swami would say, if you can get all the luggage in the car, you can both come. So Keshava and I learned to pack a car like you wouldn't believe. Anyway, but I remember we arrived a little late, and at that time Swami was driving this old Ford car that we called Air Force One, because it was actually a surplus car. We had bought it at an auction for $75. Actually, the mechanic bought 2. One to cannibalize for parts and one for Swami to drive. It was just one of those big old American cars. We loved it, partly because the trunk was really big and so we could all go. we arrived late, and there was this reception in some mansion up in San Francisco, one of the big neighborhoods up there. And we arrived late, and we had to find a place to park. And we're driving this, whoever, Seva was driving this old wreck of a vehicle. And you could still, they had painted over the word Air Force, but you could still see it. That's why we called it Air Force One. It still said Air Force in dim letters on the side. And we're driving by, and there's, you're driving by the Mercedes, you're driving by the Cadillacs, you're driving by the Rolls Royces. There were a few of those. And Swami pulls in this Ford. And he got out and he said, I have to get a better car. He said, not because I care, but in the United States where money is so easy to come. He said, in India, they would respect me for driving this car. Now, I don't know if that's still true, but back when Swami was there in the 60s, he said they would respect me for driving this car. In the US, where money is so easy to come by, they would think if the leader drives an old wreck of a car like that, there must be something wrong with what they're doing. And he said that too. He insisted that we pave the roads at Ananda village, that we put in electricity, that we make the guest facility nicer. For the same reason, he said, in this country especially, if your presentation is not refined, people will not think that your ideas are refined. So even though many of us would rather, when I moved from my little hovel to a place that had electricity, of course it was convenient, but it was restless. I could feel, once I was in a building that was wired for electricity, where I had been living without that, I was very conscious of how disharmonious that vibration was. I like to think I could go back to the very primitive, I don't know. But he just said we have to. And then at the same time, we begin to get nervous because you look at this building and you think this building has something to do with what we are. How could you not think that? But it has nothing to do with what we are. It provides an environment in which we can do some really wonderful things. We can dance, we can sing, we can have beautiful meals, we can have pageants. When we were in the office building over on California Avenue, it was a little hard because we actually had it was an office building and there was an atrium at a certain point, and on Christmas Eve, everybody else was gone, so we snuck down to the atrium and we had a crash scene in the atrium, and then we disappeared it all before everybody came to work the next day. This place allows us to do things, but if there was no God spirit in it, it would be nothing. It would have nothing to do with our work. So it's a fine line all the way through. That's our responsibility now. We don't have the comfort of being poor, which keeps us from being attached because we have nothing to be attached to, or keeps us. Myself at a certain point, Swami wanted. It was complicated, but he wanted me to come back and live next door to him. I was living somewhere else, and there was no place to live. There was literally no building. So he wanted us to build a building, and so we did. But it was a trauma for me, because as long as I was living in impoverished circumstances, I could be sure that I was spiritual. But if I had my own bathroom, and I put wallpaper in the bathroom, I had a wallpapered bathroom. You have no idea. It was just like, really, this is how I live now. Have I forgotten God? I got over it. But that's how it becomes. That's the trick of the whole thing. How do you stay simple? Yeah. I think we're doing a good job. I think we're super creative and so on, but it's different. Yeah. You see how it gets. These girls make, today is a little bit of a barren altar, I turned back to say, and they make these lovely altars, which they do, but you can see how you just want to make things more and more beautiful. Oh, if we had a little more gold, wouldn't that be nice? If we had a little of this. When I was hosting for Swamiji, he taught me to cook, and then I often hosted when guests were there. And somebody, because people have all these things in their life, somebody came and they gifted Swami with a silver samovar. And whenever I would have to serve tea to a group, it was a little complicated. And I remember it came in and I said, oh, just what we need, a silver samovar, just what we need. And then I thought, just what we need? When did we become to need a silver samovar? But it starts moving, and then you don't realize how far you've moved. So yes, he talked about it a lot. He would often say, I could walk away from it all without ever looking back. After he built Crystal Hermitage and it was done, he was traveling and somebody said, oh, we could buy this. Swami said, I am not going to spend the rest of my life furnishing Crystal Hermitage. He said it needed to come up to a certain level. It's done. I'm not really here to make a house. I'm here to have it be refined enough so that people will take us seriously. But you see the difference in that. There was no commitment on his part at all otherwise. Yes, what was you going to ask?
I have kind of a future-oriented question. Since Master said that he put his vibration in the autobiography, and he and Ananda were both such prolific writers, what are the chances that AI could capture their vibration?
You want me to know my opinion? Absolutely not. Zero, nothing. Not a chance in the world. It's a machine. The vibration is not created by the words. They could create exactly the same words. There's no living consciousness behind it. It's just, because it's clever. Vibrations are not created because it's clever. They're not creating because the writing is good. They're creating because there is a living consciousness that is communicating to you through that. And when we forget that and start just looking at the words and think that something has actually been told to us, it's what happens when a civilization is about to collapse, which is that we just completely lose touch with where our real vitality comes from. And we become more and more dead is the only thing. I think AI is extremely interesting. It's here to stay. Lots of people that I know, some friends of mine, use it very creatively and very effectively. I mean, I'll tell you a joke. The woman who does all my social media, Ishani, she's brilliant with it. She's just made she uses it really, really well. And because we have so many hundreds of opportunities to communicate, which I'm not going to take up, she sometimes uses AI in order to answer. And she's fed the thing and she's trained the thing. She's given it thousands of my words and so on. But I won't ever put my name on it. She'll call it from us, but not from me. And then every so often she would send me something and see if I would take it. So, these would come, and just uniformly I would hate them because it would be exactly the same words, but it would have no vibration. There would be no heart in it. I don't know how else to put it, except she sent me one, and I said, no, of course not. She had taken it word for word from some unpublished article by Yogananda. So that caused me to look a little more carefully. Now, I'm going to claim that I didn't really look at it carefully. I just rejected it on principle. You got to believe me, But nonetheless, of course, that could happen. But see, this is spiritual transformation takes place when we attune our consciousness with the consciousness of a higher vibration. Guru is an essential part of spiritual life. And Guru is not the teaching, it's not the words. Guru is that vibration of consciousness, and you go through the words. You go through the message. But what's actually changing you is not the ideas that you're reading, but the fact that you have aligned yourself with that energy. And there's nothing on the other side of AI. There's no expanded consciousness on the other side of it. It's dead. It's not life. It imitates life, but it has no consciousness. There's no soul. I mean, it's so magnificently, unbelievably perfect and predictable that technology would go this way, because our society has become so atheistic. We're just so atheistic. Almost everything that's wrong with our culture, if you actually start tracing it through, it's because we no longer understand a higher reality. We no longer understand discipleship. We don't understand intuition in its true sense. We just look at the form and we think the form is the reality of it. So, but it's here to stay, and it's going to probably get a lot worse before it gets better. So who knows what's going to happen? I have rather strong feelings on this subject, as you might have noticed. I've come to respect, a lot of people have told me all the ways they're using AI, which are all very, very interesting and very good. And Ishani uses it to great effect. It really helps what we're doing because she can interact with people so much more than she could if I were, she's not inclined as a writer and I just can't write. So they amalgamate things that I've said and send it out, but it's never has the life force. It can't.
Read with any of the things that AI has produced for you?
Well, I mean, I'm not quite. Say the question again. What was the actual question?
Based on the AI answer that you were supposed to have given,
I
you look at it and say, I would never.
I mean, this is a discussion that Ishani and I have had back and forth. I would prefer that she not be doing that. But the benefit of it is greater than my reluctance, because I really don't want that voice to be mistaken for mine. So, because it isn't. Even if the words are there, it isn't. And also, it has no capacity to intuit what the right answer would be for that person. When I answer the questions myself, I'm often quite surprised what I say, because there's another consciousness on the other side, and there's an actual meeting of consciousness, and this will be what I'll say. But AI just says, well, they asked about this subject, and these are what we say about this subject, and so here's the answer to this subject. But it does help them, because it is the answer to this subject. But it doesn't help them as it would if I could answer, but I couldn't. We get hundreds. And I mean, this is the dynamics of it. Because she's very active, then they spread what I do out farther. So, I mean, she always persuades me. I've never won a single argument with Ishani, not once. And I'm pretty darn good at arguing, trust me. But I never win because and so I've accepted it. But I still don't like it. I've just accepted it. No, Swami never talked about AI because it didn't exist, but he had very strong feelings about consciousness, and the complete delusion that you could substitute some kind of inanimate something for consciousness. You can't. And the fact that people think you can is why we're in so much trouble. Yeah. Yes, Chantal. This is, how am I'm supposed to go probably an hour and a half. Yeah, go ahead.
Could you share a little bit about how Swamiji helped others when he was counseling them or when he was answering questions, and in what ways that you have observed?
Swamiji, he never intruded any agenda of his own into the way he treated people. He never thought in terms of what you might benefit him or benefit the work. He never became impatient. To my experience, and I'll use these as absolutes, to my experience, which was extensive but by no means complete. I mean, he had thousands upon thousands of circles, and I was just part of one of them. He had an intuition about what would help you, and that's what he would do. Even if you weren't going to be helped as fast or as quickly as he would want you to be, he never pushed it. He would just do what was helpful to you, and then he would leave the rest in God's hands. The reason he could do that is because he always knew that God was in charge. and that he didn't have to make it happen. He would do everything that was within his power to do it, but he wouldn't try to intrude on your free will to make you do it, because if it didn't arise out of complete understanding from you, it wouldn't serve anything anyway. So what was the point? And he was extremely subtle in the way he would speak. There's a story in the Kriyananda, Swami Kriyananda's, we've known him, that first book. This person wanted to do something, and it wasn't a good idea. Swami knew it wasn't a good idea, but they were in a position where they wanted to get Swami's blessings on what they were going to do. So they said, I'm thinking of doing this, but Swami knew that there was no deterring them. That if he'd said, don't do it, the person would not have been able, it would have created an insoluble conflict for the person, because their desire to do it was so strong, and if you pose that against Swami's opposition, the person would not be able to give up the desire. They would just be in terrible internal conflict. You see, this is, many lesser teachers would use their power to try to compel you. Swami would never do that. So when that person asked, I want your blessings on this, Swami said, I bless you, I always bless you. And the person wasn't listening closely enough to hear what he'd said. And so they walked out and they said, oh, Swami blesses it. And they went on to follow what they were doing, and it was a catastrophe. But Swami never, ever said anything other than, I bless you, I always bless you. Because he couldn't say yes, and he knew he shouldn't say no. It was just, and that was very, very typical. And he would always be appropriate. There was a situation, I walked in once where this woman she was having some relationship heartbreak, as people do, and she was crying, and she was very upset, and he was comforting her, and just being very supportive, even though she was an impossible person, and of course that's why she was having so much trouble. But he never said a word about that, because she wasn't asking that, and she wouldn't have heard it if he told her. So he comforted her, and then I came, and I had some big crisis that I was going through. Let me think if I get this right. Yeah, this is the one. It was a writing project I had to do, and I was just in pieces because I couldn't do it. And I was sitting in front of Swamiji. Sometimes he would be in that armchair, and I would sit on the floor, and there would be the little hassock between us. And I was telling him about just, I don't know, I was crazy. I would just go on and on, this emotional stuff. 50 years later, I can't relate to it, but believe me, at the time I could. And all of a sudden, I became aware, I was sort of like, I think I was crying. And I became aware that he wasn't in front of me anymore. And I heard him doing something over here. I've told this story before. And because I worked in his house, I knew where he was. Because we didn't have electricity, flashlight batteries of all kinds, like your flashlight would go dim, but there would still be a little bit of energy in the battery, and so you could still use it for something else. And because we were so poor, you couldn't just throw it away. So we stored them there, and then we had this little testing machine. Then they would accumulate, and so it would be like the last job you would ever do was go over there and test all those batteries. I'm having the crisis of my life, and I realize that Swami is testing batteries over here. I'm here, I've just watched him be so sympathetic, and now I'm sobbing my heart out, and he's testing batteries. And I coughed, I tried to get some attention. Nothing. And I was really agitated. And I walked up to the hill to where I was living, and I went to my trailer, and I sat down and I wrote the damn article. I don't know, something energized me. Just that, it energized me, and I sat down and I wrote the thing, and it was one of the ones that got accepted. It was good, like that. But in 10 minutes, and then even more. And I've never heard this before. A few days later, we're having a community satsang, and Swami Kriyananda says to the whole community, which again is about 50 people, he says, Asha faced a very big test this week. And if she hadn't passed it, she would have left, but I'm pleased to say she passed it. I said, why didn't you tell me? He said, because I didn't think it would help for you to know. And I mean, these are two incidents. I watched this. I watched it with me. I watched it time after time after time after time, because he had no need for things to be different than they were. He was only there to help. I mean, he set the bar really high. Really, really high. Okay, my friends. I could take one more and I would try to be fast, or else we'll just have it be a night. All right. Thank you very much. And we'll do the same thing next week, if you like. I'll be here. Thank you. Bless you.